One of the most common questions I get asked is, are Airbnbs still allowed in Canmore? And honestly, that's the wrong question. It makes it sound like there's a simple yes or no answer, when in reality, the situation is much more nuanced than that. The real questions are these: where are short-term rentals allowed? How are they regulated? And what are the implications if you misunderstand the zoning or get it wrong? Because the truth is, Airbnbs absolutely still exist in Canmore, but they don't exist everywhere and they don't work the same way that people assume. The goal here isn't to sell you on short-term rentals, and it's not to scare you away from them either. It's to walk you through the reality, both the pros and the constraints, so you can decide if this is actually a good fit for you long-term. And when people say, I want to buy an Airbnb in Canmore, what they usually picture is a type of property, a condo, a townhome, something with a mountain view. But Airbnb isn't a property type, it isn't a building style, and it isn't an architectural category. Airbnb is a land use. In Canmore, land use is governed by zoning, and zoning dictates what a property can and cannot be used for. And that includes short-term rentals, long-term rentals, primary residences, secondary suites, all of it. And so when people are surprised that a beautiful home can't be used as a short-term rental, it's usually because they're thinking about the property itself and not the zoning behind it. The town of Canmore treats short-term accommodation very differently than most people expect, and those rules apply regardless of how nice the unit is, how much you renovated it, or what someone else might be doing down the street. Now, from a short-term rental standpoint, properties in Canmore generally fall into three broad categories. First, you have purpose-built visitor accommodation. These are typically newer developments that are specifically zoned for short-term use. Owners can usually occupy these units for a limited number of days per year, but they can never be used as a full-time residence or converted into a long-term rental. This is a critical point that many buyers miss, because these properties are designed for tourism use first and ownership second. Now, the second category is limited tourist or mixed-use zoning, which historically allows both short-term and long-term use. Now, there are still specific condo buildings where short-term rentals are permitted, but those permissions are very location and even building specific. A third category are properties that are not short-term rental friendly at all. These make up the majority of Canmore's residential housing stock. Even within the same building, it's possible for different floors or different units to be governed by different zoning rules. And that's why it's so critical to pull the land use map and review the exact designation. This is a non-negotiable. Now, here's where a lot of frustration comes from. Buyers will say, it's a great unit, it's renovated, it's right next door to another Airbnb, why can't I do the same thing? Well, the answer is simple, even if it's not satisfying, and that is that zoning dictates use. Renovations don't change zoning, comparable units don't change zoning, being in the same building doesn't automatically change zoning. Each individual property has to be evaluated on its own land use designation and the rules that apply to that designation under the bylaw. The town has also become much more proactive with enforcement. There have even been some well-publicized cases, unfortunately, where owners were fined for operating unpermitted short-term rentals, including a notable case in Wapiti Close, where a property owner faced a significant fine after neighbors raised concerns about it. Now, the takeaway here isn't fear, it's clarity. If you're going to do this, you need to do it correctly. There are a few misconceptions I see over and over again. And the first is assuming that because a listing says Airbnb allowed, that it must be correct. But that information always needs to be verified independently. An owner may have told their agent that they have been using the property short-term when they may not have been allowed to do that at all. And the agent simply doesn't fact-check the zoning. Zoning changes, permissions get removed, and what was allowed 5 years ago may or may not be allowed today. Another big misconception is around self-management of these properties. On paper, it looks like a great way to save 20–25% on the bottom line, but in reality, it's much closer to starting a full-time business. You're managing access codes, handling cleaners, replacing missing items, responding to guests at all hours of the day and sometimes night. And most of these owners don't live in town. In Canmore, you got to remember that short-term rentals are occupied 80, 90, even 100% of the time at certain parts of the year. And so it's important to have a property manager. Property managers aren't just a convenience, they're the host. Their name's on the listing, they have the reviews, the systems, the superhost status, and all of that new listings just won't have. Self-managing can work, but only if you're a local and treating it like a full-time job. This is exactly why I'm putting this series together. This isn't about hype or highlight reels, it's about the real nuts and bolts of owning a short-term rental in Canmore. So over the next few videos, we're going to break down the rules clearly and intentionally. We'll talk about where short-term rentals actually work, what the real costs look like, and how to think about revenue versus profit. Because you'll hear people throw out numbers like, oh, that property did $150,000 in gross revenue last year. But without context, that number is absolutely meaningless. Mortgage costs, condo fees, management fees, maintenance, and reserves, they all matter in this equation. And so this series is designed to help you avoid common mistakes, set some realistic expectations, and decide whether this is the right fit for you. And here's the important part. This can be profitable. Canmore is an exceptional market for properly zoned short-term rentals, but it's not for everyone. The goal here is confidence and clarity, so that if you do move forward, you're doing it with your eyes open and with the right information in front of you.